Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Daily Debate. My name is Ahmed Nader and today we'll be focusing on the offensive launched by Turkey on northeastern Syria and the condemnation of the Arab world, more specifically Egypt, which called to be hosting an extraordinary meeting of the Arab foreign ministers on Saturday and calling on the international community and the Arab world to be shouldering the responsibility in terms of stopping the aggression on the Syrian territory that happened on Saturday, and we'll be focusing on the offensive on Turkey on the eastern or the northeastern parts of Syria. But on Sunday, we'll be switching to the presidential activity of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And the top story of tonight is about President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi attending the 31st Cultural Symposium of the Armed Forces, dubbed October Determination and Challenge, at the International Manara Conference Center in New Cairo on Sunday, which was coinciding with the 46th anniversary of the October War victory. Addressing the attendees, President al-Sisi touched on several issues as the economic challenges that are facing the nation, war against terrorism, the Renaissance Dam, water issues, and the aggression on Syria. He stressed that the Egyptians should be aware of the challenges which face the nation. President al-Sisi resembled the ongoing war in Sinai with the war of attrition, warning against the attempts to distort the image of the armed forces. He affirmed that the army is waging a ferocious battle against terrorism in Sinai while battling to build the state and achieve progress. The head of state noted that the army did not request any donations from the people to build the nation's capabilities like what happened in 1967. The president said that today Egypt is the solid, strong wall that has stood to face the waves of danger and terrorism that affected the entire region, destroying and affecting millions of the inhabitants, causing fear, displacement, murder, and the loss of the future. He reiterated that the Egyptians have proven once again that they have a will stronger than their enemies' expectations, and they will always be closely connected with their state and the institutions to form together one bloc that will never be broken. Meanwhile, President al-Sisi announced that the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the President would hold talks in Russia on the Renaissance Dam under construction on the Nile River to discuss the subject to move forward without giving a specific date. He expressed a hope that the issue would be resolved, ensuring that filling the dam's reservoir and the operation of it would not seriously harm Egypt. President al-Sisi said that the government had a plan through 2037 worth 900 billion Egyptian pounds to overcome the water poverty, which includes building huge seawater desalination plants and sewage triple treatment plants. According to President al-Sisi, Egypt had already spent 200 billion pounds on the plan and would spend 70 to 100 billion more by next year. During Sunday's symposium, President al-Sisi honored the former Armed Forces Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Abdurrabbi Nabi Hafid, for their efforts while leading the Infantry Mechanics Troop 16 during the 6th of October War. He also honored the Army Commandos member Ahmed Fawzi, who was injured in Sinai. al-Sisi also honored the actors of the Corridor or Al-Mamar film, which offered a glimpse on the events during the war, saying that the film was a beautiful message for the Egyptians with a performance that reflected the Egyptian spirit. And to be focusing on the presidential activity of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Sunday and the extraordinary meeting of the Arab foreign ministers on Saturday, I am honored to be having with me in the studio tonight Ambassador Hamdy Saleh, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for being with us today, Your Excellency. If we can start with Sunday, the presidential activity, and of course in the month of October we are celebrating the victory of the 1973 October victory against Israel. The transparency in connection between President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the people of Egypt. How do you see it under his tenure?
First, I think this is a very good tradition that the Egyptian armed forces will convene in memory of the October War,
Yes.
a seminar, a conference, which is really deepening the way of thinking about what happened in that period and how Egypt achieved victory and what kind of vision that provide us for the future. But second, the comments by the president in several areas which you mentioned were really very revealing, because this president is trying to be transparent with the people, as you said. And he focused on the issues which really the people are very much concerned about. The economic issues, you know, the ability for the people to live in a better way, and how the government is going to try to contribute to that. And also the issue of you know, the terrorism. It's a major issue. And people try, you know, some of the people outside Egypt and some of the extremists and terrorist groups are trying to say this is not the issue. This is not really the thing. It's just the domestic problems. It's not true, because this really contributes to domestic problems. Terrorism is a handicap in front of Egypt and in front of the entire region. It really makes the economic life very difficult. You know, tourism is not really in the best way.
Yes.
And you know, the general atmosphere is not the best way. And for President Sisi to emphasize that Egypt is countering a major war with terrorism, which is very much resembling the war of attrition, is a very good way of putting it to you, because really this is an attrition of the resources of the region at large, not Egypt alone, that we are wasting our resources in front of these people who are really extremists, terrorists and groups and so on, everywhere in the region at large. And Egypt is a leading, you know, state in the region. Third, he also talked about this main issue, which is, you know, preoccupying the Egyptian consciousness and awareness, which is the Nile Valley and the Nile water. And he did go into two areas. One of them that, you know, there is some way to talk again about the issue with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Hopefully, after the Prime Minister of Ethiopia was nominated to the Nobel Prize, that now he will become a little bit aware of the fact that, you know, he should resolve issues by peaceful means. And that's to stand up to his reputation as a Nobel Prize in the peace process. But the second area, which is the President emphasized, the fact that Egypt should also look into alternative solutions, including, you know, they're doing a lot of you know, programs for, you know, the water,
desalination, yes.
Desalination of the seawater, and also, you know, treating the water from other sources, and even looking for other sources of the water, underground water, and so on. So, in a sense, the presentation of the president was revealing, was convincing, and I think it was very useful at this particular point.
Yes, speaking specifically of the negotiations between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, and more specifically, as President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi mentioned today, there would be a meeting between the president and the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in Russia. How do you see those talks in terms of solving the dispute in the negotiations?
I don't have the entire picture, because basically there is some forces within Ethiopia which are pushing for extremism, and some forces were pushing for reconciliation. And it's not clear to what extent Abiy Ahmed will be able to move on himself.
Yes.
When he came to Cairo, he promised that he will be able to resolve the issue and to reach a peaceful agreement. And that did not materialize. So we have to look and to see to what extent that will really materialize in the future. But in the meantime, the issue has to be always discussed on the international level, and to show to what extent this is really very much you know, harmful to Egypt and to the people of Egypt, 100 million people,
yes.
for very little reasons. I mean, basically, you can really produce all this electricity without using all that magnitude of water. So it's not logical.
And of course, President al-Sisi also spoke about the development of the role of the armed forces in Egypt. It's not just about fighting terrorism and protecting the country, it's about development as well in Sinai. How important is the role of the armed forces, and how did it evolve as we did see in the past 46 years ever since the victory against Israel in 1973?
The armed forces has played a very important role both in the war of attrition and the war of terror against terror, and in defending the country and really enhancing the image of the country as a country which really has a power to project it is force outside the country and so on. And you know, in the region, always they look to Egypt that, you know, this here is a military power which can help in the Gulf, can help in Yemen, can help in other parts. Right? So, in spite of the fact that we have a principle that we should not send our forces outside, but at least the image itself is very important. The image of the Egyptian armed forces as, I think, number 11 or 12 worldwide. Now, to what extent this should be projected in the domestic arena and to get them to play a role in the development, that's an issue which has been discussed several times. And I think they have done a beautiful job in certain areas, particularly the infrastructure, building the roads and so on. And they are also building several institutions and factories. However, I think the most important thing is to emphasize the partnership between private and public partnership. And that's what we are going to do very soon in the future.
Yes, and we did see as well at the latter part of the cultural symposium being attended by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the honoring of the heroes or the stars of the film Al-Mamar or the Corridor. How do you see the importance of the soft power in Egypt, not just outside of Egypt, for the people outside of it to be knowing more about the country, for the people inside of it to be growing together and to be standing united in the face of terrorism and in the face of the external powers?
Look, Egypt was a major power and force in the region because of its soft power.
Yes.
Before it is, acquired even the military power and other things in the 1930s and 1940s, Egypt was the real center for culture and so on, at large for the entire region, and even reflecting it is cultural abilities also in other areas in Africa and some parts of Europe. So we have a tradition of being, a cultural leader, and we have creativity. We have people, always people to pinpoint to Taha Hussein, Aqad, and so on. But also nowadays there is some other leaders of thought, which I think they are representing new trends in culture and so on. However, we have been competing now with other forces. It's particularly in the Gulf, people who have money, and people also in other parts of that, even Morocco and Algeria and other parts of the Mediterranean. Turkey even was playing a very important role. So it's about time that we regain our momentum and really to rebuild our ability for being a soft power, or whatever you call it, the culture influence. Now, for the president and for the army to honor a particular film, which I did not see, so I cannot really comment on it, but is a very good sign, because it tells you that we are now in the process of really getting back into focusing on culture, on instruments of soft power, and of really emphasizing the words, not only the material things.
Yes, and turning from the presidential activity of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Sunday, attending the cultural symposium at Al-Manara Center, and of course the issues and the points that we just spoke about with Ambassador Hamdy, Saleh will be turning to Turkey and the offensive on Turkey on northeastern Syria and the condemnation of the Arab League, and more specifically Egypt, on Saturday in the upcoming report. So let's see it.
Arab foreign ministers decide political and economic measures against Turkey. At the request of Egypt, the Arab League convened an emergency meeting at the Pan-Arab Body's headquarters in Cairo to address the latest Turkish aggression on northeastern Syria. At the meeting chaired by Iraqi Foreign Minister Muhammad Ali al-Hakim, the Arab foreign ministers condemned the Turkish offensive against Syrian land and called for a halt to such aggression and the unconditional withdrawal of Turkish forces from Syria. The ministers rejected the imposition of any demographical changes in Syria. Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul Gheit said the meeting passed several decisions vis-à-vis the Turkish aggressions in northeastern Syria, including declaration of support for the independence and territorial integrity of Syria and the need for the adoption of a political solution in Syria. Abu al-Ghait noted that a series of economic, political, touristic and commercial measures would be taken against Ankara. He stressed that Turkey must take responsibility for any return of terrorist groups to Syria. The Arab League chief said that there is a need to redeem Syria's role in joint Arab work, reiterating that there is a need to form an Arab committee to address Turkish interference in affairs of Arab countries. Abu al-Ghait also called on the United Nations Security Council to pass a strong measure on the Syria issue. Addressing the gathering, Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri condemned the Turkish assault and called on the whole international community to unite to preserve Syria's unity and sovereignty. The top diplomat said the assault came during a critical time when Syria formed its constitutional committee. Other top diplomats rejected the Turkish offensive and called on pulling out all foreign troops from Syria and resorting to peaceful settlement in the country. They also demanded a unified Arab stance to stand against Turkish offensive and preserve the Syrian territories, besides ending the bloodshed and the return of Syria to the Arab fold as its citizens have suffered and endured the most. They noted that the Turkish expansionist ambitions in the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic cannot be justified under any pretext. Turkey began a planned military offensive into northeastern Syria last Wednesday, launching airstrikes and artillery fire across the border just days after the Trump administration announced it was pulling U.S. troops back from the area. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan claimed that the operation was aimed at pushing Kurdish forces away from Turkish borders and bringing peace to the region. On Wednesday night, Turkish Defense Ministry said that the armed forces and the Syrian National Army had launched their land operation into the east of the Euphrates River as part of the operation, as a barrage of airstrikes and artillery fire volleyed into northern Syria. Chaotic scenes unfolded on the ground as people tried to flee to safety. Roads were gridlocked with hundreds of fleeing families, motorcycles piled with 5 to 6 people and mattresses strapped to cars. The SDF suspended their counter-Daesh operations amid the bombardment to focus on the Turkish offensive. Trump defended his decision to withdraw troops from northern Syria but added that the U.S. does not endorse Turkish assaults. Turkey's Minister of National Defense said that the United States, the United Nations and NATO, among others, had been informed of the operation. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin asked Erdogan to carefully weigh the situation in Syria so as not to harm the overall efforts to resolve the crisis. In the statement, the Kremlin underlined the importance of ensuring the unity and territorial integrity of Syria and respect for its sovereignty was noted on both sides.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate. That was a report about the offensive of Turkey on northeastern Syria and the incursion of the Turkish soldiers inside the Arab country, and of course the response of the Arab League and more specifically Egypt on Saturday through the extraordinary meeting of the Arab foreign ministers on Saturday. Mr. Ambassador Hamdy Saleh, the decision of the United States to be withdrawing the American troops from the Middle East, do you think that this affected or led to Turkey incursion into Syria?
Definitely. It's a very ambiguous situation what the Trump administration is taking with regard to this situation.
Yes.
But, you know, the fact that, you know, Donald Trump announced that he was drawing the very limited number of American personnel from there, And right away, a few days later, the Turks were really emboldened to be able to move on and to really use all their forces in this way. Definitely there is some connection somewhere. And in the American newspapers, they talk about the fact that Erdogan was able to talk Donald Trump into this. So apparently there is some give and take about that. On the other side, Trump is trying to really justify his situation and saying, well, we warned them not to really affect the civilians, not to affect the minorities, and so, which is really ridiculous, because once you are using artillery and air force and so on, and this is really, until now, there is a large number of civilians have been affected by this.
Yes.
Now, the issue is that the region has been like what you call a strategic vacuum, where everybody is playing around. And that's why, I respect and appreciate very much that the Arab League invited the meeting, for the extraordinary meeting for the foreign ministers, at least to be there, to say something. For the first time, we appreciate very much that the Secretary General would come and really make a statement, a strong statement against this. It is not, an issue to only try to denounce, but it's an issue to try to build an alliance against this and to really change the situation. So we will wait to see.
But on the other hand, don't you see a contradiction from the United States labeling the offensive of Turkey and the incursion of Turkey inside Syria a bad idea? And on the one hand, Donald Trump, the American president, is deciding to be withdrawing the troops.
Look, basically, the Trump administration is not really thinking in the same context we're thinking. He came to win the presidency based on the fact that he is going to withdraw American forces from most of these areas of the world. He believes, and his constituency who elected him believe that America should not be involved in so many wars around the world, and that's really spending their money and blood on this. So he's trying to do that. He doesn't really look in depth into the complexity of the issues in the Middle East, and the real victims in Syria and the Kurds' tragedy, and so he doesn't really look very much in depth. And a reflection of that, he made a comment that was very, very funny. He said, well, the Kurds were not supporting us in the Second World War. Who said, what are you talking about? The Second World War is a different context entirely from what we are talking about. Yes. And even we cannot, make sure that the Kurds were not really supporting the United States or the West in general in the Second World War, because there is so many forces were really recruited from the Middle East, from India, from Iran, from Turkey, and so on. So it was a very funny comment. But, it tells you that, there is not a look in depth into the complexity of the issue. And as a result of that, the victims are the Kurds. The victims are the Syrian population at large. And the issue becomes more complex, because now we have to find out what is the position of Russia, of Iran, of Israel, of Syria, and of Iraq, and how we can really develop out of this a position to see how we can stop this tragedy.
On the other hand, do you think that the Kurds would consider what Donald Trump is saying a stab in the back now?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. There is for a long time the U.S. was promising them that they will support them, and apparently that promise continued for under 2 or 3 administrations, from the Bush administration to the Obama to Donald Trump, and now suddenly they abandoned them. That's definitely a stab in the back. But this is politics, and you expected that. They should have been expecting that. Now, the point is not really the issue now is American foreign policy. The issue is how to deal with the situation in the region, particularly that several forces outside the region, Iran and Turkey and Israel, are looking at it as it's a strategic vacuum, and everybody can just jump in. So how we deal with that?
Speaking of Daesh, would you anticipate a revival of the terrorist group following those attacks?
This is another expectation. The people, the Kurds, have announced that 700 or more of the Daesh forces have been escaping from prison. There is some other talks about the fact that there will be other forces joining hands with the Turks and against the Turks. Also, the perception that Turkey was the sponsor of Daesh, the sponsor of the terrorist groups who really entered Syria. It was impossible for all these forces to gather inside Syria and to fight for that long time without coming through the territories from or the borders from Turkey. And it's unbelievable what happened. They really destroyed half of the country. Now, what will happen it's really up it's a real challenge. What will happen, whether the Daesh and other forces will come up or not, I don't know. But this will complicate the situation very much.
On the other hand, the response of the Arab League and the Arab foreign ministers on Saturday with the economic measures and political measures would be taken against Turkey. How do you see such a step?
Well, what I understood from the statement of Ahmed Abul Ghaid, the Secretary General of the Arab League, is that there would be some measures taken, but not specific yet, and that each country has to measure its own action based on its own interests and so on. But at least there is a position. There is an Arab position, and there is a position which really alarmed Turkey very much. They started to attack Ahmed Abul Ghaid personally, saying, well, he's a traitor of the cause for peace and so on. Ridiculous. I mean, the fact that you tell them don't attack another country he becomes a traitor for one. What is really more surprising and more alarming is the fact there is some groups in the Arab world itself are supporting this. The Qatari and the group with the Al Jazeera and so on, when you watch it, you see, my God, they are really almost supporting the invasion. There is some groups also in the Islamic, the Muslim Brothers and so on, are supporting that. This is the most ridiculous situation you can imagine, because now you are supporting an invasion of another country, of victimizing an entire group, the Kurds, and no solution. I mean, if there is a solution, we can actually look about it, but there is nothing at all. This is a real tragedy.
Some groups and some institutions, as you said, Mr. Ambassador, are defending the offensive of Turkey against Syria. What are the benefits of those states or those countries?
It reflects the division in the Arab world. There is these three countries who are really supporting the Muslim Brothers, Turkey and Qatar, and of course Iran from somewhere, but with a different context. And based on this, you have all these problems in the Middle East as a result of this effort by the Turks and the Qataris' money and the Iranian support. You have all these problems in Libya, sending arms to the Muslim Brothers who are fighting in Libya and so on, and the terrorist groups and so on. You have these problems in Iraq. You have these problems in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and the dynamics which is going on over there. And then you have the problems also in Yemen. So in a sense, this context of really a division in the Arab world and Islamic world it's replaying itself into this. And on another level, this is also a new level of the Osmani Empire coming back to reality. Mr. Erdogan is still believing himself to be the man who is regaining the grandismo of the Ottoman Empire, and he's moving on with his with the military force, and not even bothering about the announcement from Europe, from everywhere in the world, from the Middle East, from the Arab countries, and from Africa, and everywhere. And of course, the Security Council did not really make a resolution against him, but that's not an issue, because it's basically there is a major public opinion, denouncing this effort, this movement, this tragic war.
Speaking of the Arab League, what are the possible diplomatic measures that could be taken against Turkey during this context?
Well, I understand that there would be, some measures, economic measures and diplomatic measures to reduce the diplomatic representation and to reduce the economic involvement with Turkey. And that definitely will be very harmful, especially that, with America is already, making sanctions against Turkey in some areas, and warning Turkey that they will also be sanctioned if they did other things. So Turkey is not in a very good position, neither economically nor politically. The relations with Europe is very strained. The relations with the Middle East is very strained. And with Russia is give and take, it's wavering. So I don't know what Erdogan is trying to do. I mean, he's really playing a game of really grandismo and trying to, play the hero, but in the final analysis, he's losing. He's losing inside his country and outside his country.
The Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul Ghaid also announced that the Arab League or the Arab states are demanding Turkey to be withdrawing the troops. Do you think that the Arab League and the Arab world in general has the tools of compelling Turkey into such a demand?
It's not a matter of compelling. Basically, at a situation like that, you have to make a position. And the position is clear from the Arab countries that, this is an Arab land and should not be invaded by a foreign country. And to stand still, this is ridiculous. You have to stand up to the situation and say this is an invasion and this is a tragic situation. But in the future, probably there will be a dynamics to help the Arab side to win and to move in. Bear in mind that another part of the picture is that Turkey is getting into a very big war, which they don't know what is the end of it, because it's not an issue of just invading the territory, but then how you can stand still there. There would be a war of attrition, guerrilla warfare. There would be other forces fighting them. There would be pressure from the world forces. I mean, what are they going to do with this? They say they were going to have a safety corridor. What is safety corridor if you are fighting people and really having a tragic situation with your neighbors? So it is not an easy situation for Turkey at this particular point, and I think the Arab League stated a good position. And I think if they move on step by step to present it in the international organizations, particularly the General Assembly, I think it would be some pressure on Turkey.
The Arab member states also called for reinstating Syria into the Arab League, which had the membership suspended in 2011. Do you think that this is the right time for Syria to be returning to the Pan-Arab body?
Look, this is a very complex issue because Syria has been, cut from the Arab League or suspended from the Arab League at least for some reasons, and a number of countries supported that. Now there is an evolving group of countries who are really supporting the return of Syria. There is, still, controversial issue about who is leading Syria, what's happening in the constitutional process, and so on. But I think in this particular period of time, I think there is a possibility of asking Syria to come back, and I think that's a good idea to have at this particular time. But it is one step only to recognize the integrity of Syria and the integrity of the territories of Syria.
And the Arab foreign ministers also called for a political solution inside Syria. How can this be done following the complexity which was witnessed by Turkey?
Look, the Syrian situation is very complex. So they are talking about the fact the Kurds were really not very much close to the Syrian government.
Yes.
And now maybe with this Turkish invasion, they will bring the Syrians closer, the Kurds closer to the Syrian government. To what extent that will pave the way for a reconciliation among the factions within the Syrian landscape is a question mark, but definitely it will have an impact on them.
The Arab League and of course the United States threatened a number of sanctions on the economic level, on the political level, on the touristic and the cultural levels as well against Turkey. How do you think this would be affecting Turkey in terms of the economy, at least in its dire situation now?
Look, in the past couple of years, the relations between Turkey and the Gulf states were strained because of the support of Turkey to Qatar and Turkish interference in several parts of the Arab world and so on. So that will be increased. I mean, the strain will impact on the relationship between the Gulf states and Turkey in terms of tourism, in terms of investment, in terms of commercial interaction and so on, and trade. So I think that will affect definitely the Turkish economy. In addition to the fact that it strains the relationship with Europe. About 4 countries or so on decided to suspend any sales of weapons to Turkey. The issue is not only weapons here, but the fact that you announce this will affect also the relationship in terms of trade, in terms of tourism, and so on. The fact that you get involved in a war, and a war of attrition, affects the atmosphere of tourism and of social cohesiveness in Turkey. So it is not really an easy position for Mr. Erdogan and his group. In addition to the fact that he has divisions within his own group, political group, and so on. His party was split and so on. So it's not an easy position. And I think the Arab League now is increasing its pressure on the group of the Arab countries who are really supporting or denouncing the invasion and supporting the withdrawal of the Turkish forces will increase the pressure. To what extent that will have an impact in the short term, I don't know, but for the long term, definitely will have an impact. Speaking
specifically of the European Union and the threats of the European Union and the sanctions of it against Turkey, how would this affect the chances of Turkey joining the European Union?
No, that dream is over. The Turkish dream to join the European Union is over for a long time now. And there's so many problems between this administration in Turkey and the Europeans. Mr. Erdogan actually insulted several of the leaders of the European leaders. He acted in a very, arrogant way with some of the Europeans and so on. In addition to the fact that, the Europeans now became very, cautious in dealing with Turkey, because Turkey plays the game of the illegal immigration and using it as a card and so on. So the aspiration to join the European Union has evaporated somehow. With this situation, that will even increase the pressure on Turkey and really make a bigger distance between them and the Europeans. Turkey plays the cards of the fact that we have the military force, there is a vacuum here, and that we have good relations with Russia and somehow good relations with Iran. And Iran plays the game in between because Iran is under tremendous pressure from the US. Russia is not really clear or at least for me, I'm not clear what's the strategy they wanted to take with this regard. So in a sense, the situation seemed to be vague, and that's what Erdogan is trying to seize the opportunity to, that, nothing is clear and he's invading on. But as I said, a war, you can start a war, but you don't know how to end it. And this is a war which will lead to a war of attrition and continuous pressure on the Turkish military forces.
Yes, and we'll be having more details on the offensive of Turkey against northeastern Syria and the condemnation of Egypt and the Arab world against such a move by Turkey in the upcoming report. So let's see it.
Amid global condemnation, Egypt denounces Turkish blatant aggression on Syrian territory. Egypt has condemned the Turkish military offensive against Kurdish forces into northern Syria. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi criticized the offensive and affirmed Egypt's rejection of the Turkish aggression on Syria's territory and sovereignty. President al-Sisi warned that the operation would have adverse effects on the stability and security of the entire region. For his part, Foreign Minister Saleh Shukri condemned the Turkish aggression, referring to Egypt's warning of Turkey's expansionist behavior in Syria in several international forums attended by the Egyptian president. Shukri denounced the Turkish step as clear and flagrant violation of the decisions of legitimacy and international law, stressing that the Turkish regime should consider its position concerning Syria amid international condemnation. The top diplomat affirmed that the Turkish aggression in Syria has no justification and is a violation of the sovereignty of Syria. The Foreign Ministry also affirmed Egypt's strong condemnation of the Turkish aggression against the Syrian territory and sovereignty, calling for an emergency meeting of the League of Arab States to discuss ways to preserve Syria's sovereignty and the unity of its people and territorial integrity. The ministry described the Turkish attacks as blatant and unacceptable, and denounced violations against the sovereignty of a brotherly Arab state while taking advantage of the circumstances and the current developments it experiences, and in contravention of the rules of international law. The ministry highlighted the responsibility of the international community represented by the Security Council towards addressing this extremely dangerous development that threatens international peace and security. Spokesman for the Syrian Democratic Forces SDF, Mustafa Bali, praised the foreign minister's call for the Arab League meeting, expressing hope that the Arab countries and the Arab League would assume their responsibility towards the Syrian people and help stop the aggression on the Syrian territory. Bali said that the SDF troops did not withdraw from its positions and would clash with the Turkish army if it started a ground attack on the cities of northern and eastern Syria. The SDF called on the international community to help avoid a possible humanitarian disaster and also called on the US-led coalition and the international community to implement a no-fly zone over northern Syria similar to the one implemented in Iraq. Bahrain also condemned the Turkish operation in Syria and called for an emergency meeting of the Arab League. Saudi Arabia condemned the offensive, warning that the incursion could have negative repercussions on the security of the region. The UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation said the aggression represents a serious development and an unacceptable flagrant assault on the sovereignty of a brotherly Arab state in defiance of international law and blatant interference in Arab affairs. Governments across the world joined in condemning Turkish military offensive into northeastern Syria. European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief Federica Mogherini called on Turkey to stop its military action in Syria to prevent undermining the stability of the region. She stressed that military action would undermine the security of the coalition's local partners and risk protracted instability in northeast Syria, providing fertile ground for the resurgence of Daesh. And the UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab expressed his serious concern over the events. He warned that this risks destabilizing the region, exacerbating humanitarian suffering and undermining the progress made against Daesh, which should be collective focus. US President Donald Trump tried to justify the de facto green light he gave his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan for an assault seen as a blatant betrayal of Washington's erstwhile Kurdish allies. Trump suggested that Washington could mediate between Turkey and Kurdish groups, and as US official said Trump had asked US diplomats to broker a ceasefire. UN Chief Antonio Guterres expressed deep concern over the violence, while the Council's 5 European members urged Turkey to cease the unilateral military action. French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian called for an emergency meeting of the US-led coalition against Daesh.
Welcome back. You're still watching the daily debate, still focusing on the aggression of Turkey on Syria and the offensive on Turkey in northeastern Syria and the response of the Arab League and Egypt on Saturday in terms of calling for an extraordinary meeting of the Arab foreign ministers. Ambassador Hamdy, Saleh, if we can speak about the comment as well of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, which took place today and was mentioned in the report, that the people of Syria are responsible for what is happening in Syria nowadays following what happened in 2011. How do you think about that comment?
Basically, this is an idea which the President has mentioned before.
Yes.
That people should really preserve their own military force. The army and is the major defender of the country. And when they don't do that, the country becomes fragmented and gets into chaos and so on. So this is a situation which really the Syrians have to look into it, and to particularly not only the Syrian government, also all the factions within Syria, to try to reconcile and really think for the future to build the country again. And not only to build the country again, but also to push all these interferences from outside force. But let me come back to your report here.
Yes.
And I'd like to draw a comparison between this very wide denouncement of so many forces in Europe, in America, in the Middle East, and everywhere in the world, and the UN, denouncing this aggression, and the support, and even the very joyful way of thinking, which you find about this tragic aggression in the voices of the Muslim brothers in Turkey and in Qatar. These 2 or 3 stations in Turkey and Qatar who really talk about human rights, about the need to work for the Islamic cause, for the Arab cause, and so on. suddenly became really so superficial, and talking about the fact that they are supporting the invasion of an Arab country and the killing of Muslim, Sunni Muslim. I mean, not unbelievable. Such a hypocrisy is so revealing. Compare that to the fact that a large group of leaders of the Congress in the United States, both Republicans and Democrats, presented a resolution to impose sanctions on Turkey. Here are people who are really far away from the region, but they're really feeling for humanity and understanding what does it mean, a war, and the tragic impact of that on the people, poor people, who are civilians and so on. So they are moving in this direction. And here is some other people who are really talking, well, that's a good thing. Well, good thing for what? Yeah, it's such a, a blatant hypocrisy, which I think should really now be examined in our media and so on. In your report, you found such a wide spectrum of leaders in Europe,
Yes,
and in the United Nations, and even the United States. Even Mr. Trump himself is apologetic. He's trying to find ways. So he says he asks his diplomats to broker some ceasefire. That means that not anybody over there is really accepting this tragic action. But how come that these people in Jazeera and in Al Makamilin and all these channels and so on, voices, are really happy with it?
Speaking of the response of the Arab League as well, the chief of the Arab League, Ahmed Abul Ghait, called for the United Nations Security or the General Security Council to be passing a resolution and the number of measures to be passing a resolution changing the situation on the ground in Syria. Do you think that the resolutions passed would be implemented on the ground for real?
If the Arab countries were able to convince both Russia, China, and the United States to pass the resolution, then it could be implemented. The resolution from the Security Council could be implemented, because the Security Council has the forces and ability to impose it as well,
Yes,
because it's supported by the major powers. But if that doesn't happen, at least you can go to the General Assembly and get a resolution from the General Assembly condemning the situation. Now, what we are facing at this particular point is a de facto policy by Turkey. And there is no, as I said, because there is a strategic vacuum in the region, so there is no forces to really push them outside. But what will happen to them is that they will be, tortured with the Turkish forces with a war of attrition. And that it will take some time, and until they realize that the price of being there will be very heavy.
Speaking of the roles of the United States and more specifically Russia, because Mr. Ambassador said that the role of Russia is not clear right now in Syria and with Turkey. How do you see the future of the acts that could be taken by Russia?
Look, what is the issue at large here? The issue is that Mr. Erdogan has been arguing about the fact that he wants to establish a safety corridor along the borders of Turkey. The safety corridor is about 300 miles in length and 40 kilometers in width. And that means that he will push the Kurds, the population, the people who are living there, and the forces who are stationed there, outside that. Now, he has been arguing this with the United States and with Russia for some time. And the two forces were not really in agreement on that. And the Americans in particular were not in agreement because they were supporting the Kurds. And the Kurds, of course, were against that, and Syria is against that, because they are taking a territory from the Syrian territory and using it for Turkish security, whatever. Whereas if the Syrian government have its own sovereignty and imposing its own control on this region, it can really secure the borders.
Yes.
And it was secure before that, when Syria was a stable country before the Turkish interference and the Iranian interference and all this. So Syria was a country which is in control of its borders. So I don't know exactly where is the position of Mr. Putin and the Russian government on this. They play games with Mr. Erdogan. They are really, he thinks that he's so intelligent, but the fact is that Putin is really pushing him around and giving him here and then. Yeah, probably they are putting him in a situation which is he cannot retreat. If he is involved in this war, it will have a tremendous impact on him, and it will take some time for him to revive or to come back to be able to move ahead. But I don't know exactly the position of Russia. The position of the Trump administration, as I mentioned, is wavering. It's true that, you know, Trump would like to withdraw entirely from all the wars and say, well, let's wash our hands from this. But on the other side, there is forces within the Congress, within the Pentagon, within the media and the public opinion was saying this is ridiculous. You cannot really get things really in that bad shape and leave, because it will have an impact on Europe and on us. So we will see how the situation unfolds in Syria, in both the United States and Russia.
Foreign Minister Saleh Shukri also criticized the timing of the offensive, as he said that a constitutional committee was being formed in Syria, and it was about just about defeating Daesh in the country. Do you think that the timing is intentional to be stopping those steps?
Well, you know, it might be. I don't have the information. Minister Saleh Shukri might have more information than we have.
Yes.
But, you know, basically, Daesh was in a very much bad position, and suddenly this invasion comes, and we know that Mr. Erdogan was a supporter of Daesh, was a supporter of other terrorist groups, and, you know, until now they're still in the borders of Syria. So this invasion definitely has some connection with the fact that, you know, these people might come back somewhere. But also, the process, the peace process was going on in Syria, and we don't know. Maybe that, you know, Mr. Erdogan and his group felt threatened by the fact that Syria will come back to be a stable country. So that is a very good connection, but I don't have the information to emphasize these particular 2 points. But on the other hand, this invasion came after lengthy negotiation with the United States. You know, apparently Erdogan has been playing games with the United States and with the Trump administration, and he convinced the Trump administration that, you know, he will not do some bad things, he will play a small game, and that will relieve the United States from using its own forces. There is some games which we are not aware of. But, you know, I don't think the Trump administration will be able to continue on that route. I think there will be some shifts again and some more pressure on Turkey to stop this invasion.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador Hamdy Saleh, the former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you very much for being with us today on the Daily Debate.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.